And so there's the danger that we may not get the right time to say it. Timing is everything.
That's a great call out. Thank you. So from a facilitation point of view, I think it could be as simple, Ian, as just saying, you know, hey guys, this is the time to have that real conversation, you know, and it's safe to do that. You know, people aren't going to be incriminated, or if we need more time, we'll make the time, but this is the time. So sometimes people just need to be called out on the very thing that is their driver. Just because it's their drive doesn't mean they'll engage it, and you need to call them out on it. Like saying to an authenticator, you know, this isn't a waste of time. You know, to have this conversation, this isn't wasting time. I mean, they don't want to waste time, and they just need sometimes acknowledgement that this is useful to have that conversation. It may not even feel as useful to them, but if they find out that it's being useful to everyone else, that really helps. Greg. I can't hear you, Greg. You're on mute.
I thought I was leaving a comment, but my hand came up. There's me. Go the Greens. I was just thinking of you want just stuff for the first two?
Yeah.
Verifying thing. Oh, okay. I'll wait then. Yeah. I'm just.
Okay.
Hey, Sarah. I'd say for use authenticate, one of the vulnerabilities can be to jump right into whatever we're trying to accomplish with the meeting and skipping the personal connection piece, because we want to get down to the work and the stuff and the doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that. So I actually pulled that because I thought it was so relevant, and the point, you know, has come up a lot in our previous meetings. Why I called it out as like a universal protocol before. Sarah, maybe we should put it on this slide as well, just to reinforce it, you know. Good point.
And
it's so funny. When I'm facilitating meetings, I can almost feel the authenticators like itching away, going, come on, let's get into the real conversation. Let's get into the work, you know.
It's true.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Paul, on that particular one, I think that vulnerability of the authenticators to jump in like this is certainly true. But I know from working with some other clients that I've got that the avoid authenticators say, yeah, I know that's going to happen, but at least know that I want you to give me space by the time I'm talking to let me talk. So it's, yeah, we've got to get on with the business and do it. And that's naturally just what's going to happen, because to tell an authenticator to, hey, give time for the personal stuff first, won't always work. So if that's the case, at least even remind them, just let me talk for a bit, because that's what they want to do.
Okay, thanks, Richard.
And
that's good.
Sometimes it can be sprinkled throughout instead of making it like a part of the agenda that the first thing you do is check in. It's kind of sprinkling it throughout makes it more natural as well. For me, with the avoid verify, I find if I'm on calls all day long and people keep rehashing the same stuff, I can check out. And I've got to be very, very mindful of that and keep myself engaged.
Thanks, Patrice.
Hey, Paul, it's Pam. So a couple of things. One, in the use authenticate, I'm an avoid authenticate, and I do my best to remember to tie the information back to how they use it. So for a use authenticate, or the people that are use authenticate in the audience, how will they use the information, or what's useful about it? And as a avoid authenticate, the watch out for me is, of course, assuming that what I feel is obvious, people see as obvious, to make sure that I check in and that I'm being clear about the points or whatever it is that they're, just to check in and make sure they're connecting the dots.
That's also a really good point, Pam. Thank you. It's so true. I mean, we've mentioned that in previous meetings, but that's a great one to add in here. It's not easy to see, even when you've got people on video, you know, you can't always quite tell how it's landing compared to a live meeting. And I think that idea of then checking in so that what you thought was obvious, especially if your facilitation, if you are the avoid authenticator, that is almost like the burden. I can tell you as a one in Authenticate, the thing I carry all the time is so many things I think are obvious to everyone else are just not obvious at all. So checking in on that, even just, you know, having people play back to you what they've heard, gives you a good sense of any gaps that could have occurred. Thank you.
And I agree, like in both the Authenticate, so oftentimes we say the Authenticate drive is the one that can get you into communication trouble because we are either too blunt or we're not clear enough. We can really have a lot of miscommunications in that drive. And so as a use Authenticate as well, to really check in also, is there something else that I think there's not being said, or but because I would tend to read more into what's being said. So I think checking in both ways.
Okay. Okay. Good call. Thank you. So
I
let's,
might, I'm sorry.
go.
I was going to say I might add one more thing, and that is, you know, a lot of us are involved in highly technical specializations of one sort or another, and it's real easy to lose other technical people in your little realm where you really know your stuff and you're spitting it out, and you're losing your crowd. You're losing your participants because you're not backing off and being genericizing a little bit, and that happens to me all the time, and I see myself doing it, and I have to stop and back up and kind of start over.
So Steve, you facilitate a lot of meetings?
I do a fair amount. I won't say there are a lot of people that do more than me, but I do a fair share, my fair share.
So what have you done for some? You make a great point about, you know, how technically oriented some of those discussions can be. Given that you're aware of that in terms of your own bias, what do you do to make allowance for more diversity in the meeting?
You know, a lot more analogies, try to reduce or eliminate the use of acronyms where possible, are a couple things that stick out in my mind.
Okay. Dumb it down for people like me. That's good. That's good. I would add, you're a great example, especially with your ID 8443, of that protocol I mentioned before about asking questions, you know, as opposed to telling. That's a really challenging thing to do. I can tell you as a fellow 8 in Verify, converting the content you want to share into questions you can ask is a hell of a challenge. I just throw that to you in case that could help you in future. Okay, let's talk about the complete and improvised drives. I would also say that, you know, the complete drive can be a challenging one in a virtual meeting as well, to be honest with you. I mean, this is the drive that wants to feel normal and like it fits in, and it's very considerate of, you know, well, I don't want to talk because I'm aware of the agenda and we're running out of time and I don't want to drag, you know, hold everything up. So it can be, in terms of them giving their contribution out of either respect for the agenda or respect for what everyone else is being said and not wanting to be the one who is, you know, abnormal or that different to the group. It can be challenging. So if not only if you want them to contribute, but you do want them to contribute, because it's often in so many teams we work with, there aren't that many completers on the call, and they've got a perspective in terms of the bigger picture that they see and the way they can forecast where some of these discussions and decisions are going to go to, and they can play it out for you right now rather than having to wait 3 months to see what did and didn't work. But you'll need to call on them specifically and make it safe for them to contribute. Like, you know, calling out and saying to someone, like if I think of the people on this call, you know, someone like, you know, Vanessa, who's really strong and complete, or Lou and Sarah, you know, if you said, can you play this out for us? What do you see playing out that we're not talking about right now? That's a call right to their talent, and then they will feel not just obliged, but they'll want to contribute that, because that's, you know, that's value back to the team. But you'll need to be conscious of who those people are and call them into the discussion very specifically. For the avoid completes, you know, the challenge is keeping yourselves from getting bored. you know, it's just so easy, and so many of them are off camera so they can do other work, or even when they're on camera, you can see that they're doing something else. And it comes across to people who are really engaged in the meeting, it comes across as disrespectful, disengaged, and depending on who you are, it can be having quite a negative effect on your brand more than what you might realize. So, you know, you might need to participate in the meeting in a different way so that you can stay more engaged and therefore contribute more and protect your brand at the same time. For the improvised drive, we talked about before about dominating. The domination there, though, is not the same as the verifier. It's not because you've already got an agenda and you've done all this prep and you're making your very technically proficient point. It's just because you're an interactive person. And when someone says, have we got any questions, the ideas tend to flow. In a discussion, you know, the improvisers are the ones that really are in their natural elements because it's interactive and it's not pressure. They don't think of it as pressure, but it's high energy. And so they tend to contribute very quickly. So being conscious of that, and maybe instead of, if you're the improviser, instead of you contributing all the time, maybe using that same improvised energy to call other people into the discussion and say, hey, you know, so-and-so, we haven't heard from you yet. I'm really curious to know what you're thinking on this, you know, and bring them in. So although you might be talking, you're not talking to contribute your own knowledge, you're talking to provoke other people into the conversation. And then I'd say with the avoid improviser, the thing that really stands out to many people there is, and especially when you've got a group that's got a dominance of avoid improvise, it can feel like there's just no one on the other end of the discussion because everyone's thinking, but nobody's talking. And what you want to be careful of there is asking your, you know, motherhood and apple pie questions of, you know, does anybody have any questions, or what does everyone think about this? And that still doesn't invoke people. So what you will, and you might want to set this up in advance so people don't feel or don't misinterpret why you're calling them out. Just say, hey guys, I know we're not that interactive sometimes on these calls. So just to help make it more interactive and meaningful to all of us, I'll call people out by name. If we're not having a good general discussion, I'll call you out by name so that you can contribute into the meeting and we'll make it more interactive. And just that's part of what Pam was saying before too, about making obvious what you're doing and why you're doing it. But if that's what you do for the avoid improvisers, and if you are an avoid improviser, just being aware that you're vulnerable to processing things in the silence of your own mind. And so just then sharing that and saying, hey guys, I'm still here and I'm still engaged. I haven't said a lot because I'm actually thinking a lot about what you said. And that at least gives room for people to say to you, well, what are you thinking? Share with us what you're thinking, you know, even that's helpful. Tell me how you guys are reacted to this. What else do you see coming up that you would want to contribute here?
For the use complete, I know one of the things to watch out for is being too attached to what the agenda is or the topics that are meant to be covered or whatever in the meeting. If you're meeting with an avoid complete and they jump around and you want to go through your, you know, A, B, C, D, but they're A, D, G, Z, whatever, right? But also the cool part, so strategy for the people that are use complete and trying to cope with, you know, meeting somewhere in the middle for the avoid completes, is because they're happy to bounce around. If they've bounced somewhere and you're still nagging about, but we needed to talk about B, you just be like, hey, sorry, let's just hop back to this really quick. And they're totally happy to do it because you're bouncing around with them, but secretly still following your agenda. So
Yeah. Good point.
Not secret anymore, Sarah.
I know, I'm trying to help people. I let the cat out of the bag of my strategy.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Now I know, Sarah.
Greg, you had some things you were going to share before, but you were holding off, waiting for the us to get to these drives.
Yes, I can stop chewing my lip now. I'm following up on Sarah's point. It was basically the idea of the complete needing to have a format and a flow and a timing and from a green up point of view, a sense of outcome. So we've got some reason why we're here, what we're going to produce, and how we're going to produce it. And I think that stuff up front, and maybe even somewhere, you know, on a slide, or they get mailed an email beforehand, like an agenda, so that there's a sense of there is a purpose, so you can stray, but you're always coming back. And I think that having that clear, but when we're so virtual, that we want to have as much locked in as we can in terms of why we're here, what we're going to achieve, how we'll know we've achieved it, what's the timing and stuff like that. And in a sense, I want my up-completes to run the meetings. I want them to have the structure and then let me be the dog out in the paddock running around, you know. So that was basically it.
Thanks, Greg. I would say most meetings I've sat in on where they do have some type of an agenda, it's just wild what people try and achieve in a meeting. It's almost like they're packing, 3 hours worth of discussion into a 30-minute time frame, for example. And in fact, I just saw one. I was on a meeting about this time yesterday, and it was, I think there was something like 14 agenda items for what was going to be a 1-hour meeting. And they might all be very important points to discuss, but if someone thought through, okay, we've got 1 hour, how many are we going to get through? I mean, they probably would have got through 3, maybe 4 at the most. And I would say that's probably about right.
Yeah.
That in most meetings, you only get through about 3 or 4 agenda items. So you want to really think about what are those 3 or 4 things that you're going to put onto that slide. Because if you have a structure, part of the talent of a completer is they're going to get through it. So you do what you said you were going to do as planned, but that might rob you of being able to have a proper discussion around those things. So I think that in the preparation of framing the meeting, keeping it just like we said about a limited number of slides, having a limited number of discussion points is also really important. And I'd say that's true of any meeting, but I think particularly in virtual meetings where everyone's easily distracted and somewhat hidden, you need to really amp these things up.
I could throw another one out there, which is, making sure that the people that you have are really needed there, and sometimes I feel like there's a tendency to invite people into a meeting just in case, or they might be interested, and the conversation isn't really pertinent to them, and it might be better to ask or to put out a call, hey, if you don't feel like this is an appropriate, or this is, something you need. A lot of times, if I'm booked, I'll just say, hey, do I really need to be here, or can you reach out afterwards if you need anything? And
Great
that
point.
keeps people from drifting because they're not involved in a conversation they're not really interested in anyway.
Great point. I guess to build on that, Steve, part of the benefit of a virtual meeting, you can record a meeting, and out of 1 hour, if a topic came up that you thought, oh, that would have been really good for Steve to be here for that point, just sort of say, well, it occurred at 43 minutes in, and it was about 5 minutes, and that way the person's only got to listen to that little segment, which is hugely respectful of their time. The old way, in a face-to-face meeting, people would say, well, we need these 6 people at the meeting, but we can't have it for 3 weeks because, Paul's not available, or Steve's not available, or Patricia's not available. The benefit with a virtual meeting is you go, let's move on anyway. We'll record the meeting. They can listen to it in their own time and add things in, or we can call stuff out to them to make sure that they're aware of it. And I love that. When people do that for me, I mean, how efficient is that of your time? But it means things can keep moving along. And so using the technology to its full extent, like the recording of meetings, is wonderful.
So I have a question that I'd love to get thoughts on. With the virtual meetings, do you find it to be beneficial to the different types if you have a potential for a follow along, such as if you don't want to get completely stuck on the meeting, or if you like to do things on the side, here's a link so that you can also follow along this process on your split screen, to kind of facilitate those who might have that, that more not out of the box thinking, but more that scatterbrain with purpose, to kind of help them reel themselves in and stay connected.
I'm missing the point of what you mean, Shanna. What can you?
Oh, I'm just wondering if it would be effective, because a lot of the I'm pretty new to doing the virtual meetings.
Okay.
And I found that for myself, it's beneficial for me to actually have two screens up and not only participating in the meeting, but if they bring something up in it, I'll go to my other screen, such as they mentioned a website or a process. I'll just go ahead and pull that up so that while they're talking about it in the meeting, I'm actually actively participating in the subject matter.
Okay.
Now, that's not something I've seen suggested anywhere. It's just something that I found works well for me. But
what's your ID?
I have not done that yet, actually. That's one of the things I'll be doing today.
Okay, good. Good. Good to know.
Very
new. But yeah, I think it's good. As long as it does, my only thing would be as long as if it's engaging you and you're able to contribute that back into the meeting, I think that's a good thing. I also think it's smart to as a facilitator know that the minute you make a suggestion like, oh, there's this website on such and such a topic, half your audience are probably jumping over to look at that website, so you want to be conscious of, as you make suggestions as a facilitator, the fact that they can have everything at their fingertips. Did you really intend to lose half your meeting by making that suggestion? So there's times when you might want to just hold back, knowing how easy it is for people to just go and jump and be distracted. But I would say so often when you do that now, people are checking out. If you mention someone's name, they're on LinkedIn checking them out. You mention a website, they're checking that out. So, you either need to allow room for it or be careful of how you share it so that
careful sharing and structure.
Yeah, part of the group. Yeah.
Thank you.
But you were asking for other contributions. Well, I don't know whether anyone else has a reaction to Shauna's question.
I was just going to call out there, Paul. I think that the key thing, and it's sort of flipping it back around, is if you do that, share that with the meeting. Oh, that's great. I'm just going to check that website out now. Oh, that looks fantastic. Not just go and do it, because then people don't know what you're doing. Whereas it's being explicit about it. Oh, okay, let me check it out while we're talking, and then I can give you some real-time feedback. So you're actually contributing to the facilitator and letting them know what you're doing. Or the facilitator might say, look, now hang on, hold off. There's some other stuff I want to cover. We'll jump to it later, so that you can at least then manage the process. So it's just calling it out, making it. I think one of the things you'll find with virtual meetings is you probably need to call things out that you wouldn't necessarily need to if you were live. That's probably would be the big takeaway there.
Yep.
The thing that I would add on to Ian, to your point, is to let people know that you've got something else up that you're checking on their behalf, because otherwise it looks like you're not paying attention. And if you're the facilitator, that can be a little distracting on camera.
Yeah, that Pamela is actually something that I'm noticing with, again, being a little more new to the virtual meetings, that it's like, what are you doing? Do I need to know what you're smiling at? Yeah. It's like, what am I missing?
I'm smiling at you.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments about what's on the slide? Anything they want to add or call out? Maybe it's missing off the slide.
I have a question, and this is maybe a little abstract, but no surprise, I'm going to avoid authenticate. So you've listed on the avoid complete, the pushing the group, the third bullet. You may be ready to move on before people are ready to move on. It's like, okay, I'm bored. Let me just go to the next one. I'm at 2 incomplete. That makes sense to me. But I also want to call out the avoid verifies, because the avoid verifies will want to move on for a different reason. So it could appear the same, but it's definitely driven differently. And I just wanted you to comment on that, Paul.
Well, so it's right, Pam, what you're saying is right. I mean, we've got some of this material in other slides for just meetings generally. And when I was thinking of this through, prepping for it, I was like, okay, what are the things that really stand out in a virtual meeting, that's different to a mainstream live meeting? And these were the things that really stood out to me. And we could just easily add it in. I think it's true. I think the difference for me is we don't encounter as many avoid verifiers as what we do avoid completers. Typically, I'm not saying there aren't as many out there in the world, but when you think about the majority of the meetings that we end up facilitating, there's so many more verifiers than avoid verifiers that are typically in those meetings. That's all. But no, it's a relevant point. We can easily add it in. Okay, so no other comments. I'll move to the questions now. If I just go to a Q&A sort of section for this, and by the way, I do have a slide. I'll show you the slide that I was going to include in. This is about how you engage people. You can see it's very wordy, so I'll include it as a resource, but not go through it here in the deck. But there's a lot of our clients love this slide. We have a slide here on engagement, and we have another slide on resistance. They come out of our change leadership modules on how to drive change, and it's how to get engagement and buy-in, and how to mitigate resistance. And they love these two slides. So I included this one in the deck, but don't want to go through it here because of how it's not well presented for a meeting like this. So Q&A. There were a couple of questions that came up in earlier meetings. One of them was, how do you have the tough conversations virtually? In the past, you'd sort of say, well, that conversation's a really tough personal conversation. I'll wait till I'm meeting the person next week face to face. I'll cover that off with them then. Or I'll wait for them to get into the office and we'll deal with it then. But now, especially when everyone's working remotely and virtually and for an extended period of time, and you've still got to have those conversations, the question has come up, from a couple of people actually on, are there any protocols around how to have those tough conversations? So I want to throw that to the group. Has anyone either started doing that or found certain things really work or not work so well? I'd be interested in any experiences people have had around tough conversations done virtually.
Yeah, I've done that recently, actually, this week, and it was, it felt as if it was going to be a challenge. So I called the uncomfortableness out. I just said, hey, we're on a Zoom and we're not in person, and I wish we were, to be able to have this conversation.
Right.
But I don't want it to take away from how genuine I am, and what we were about to talk about, basically is how I approached it. I just called it out and said, it's too bad that we can't get together in person to have this conversation, but not to let that distract us on focusing in on what we need to talk about.
And that landed well, Craig?
Say again?
That landed well?
It landed well because of the type of person. I had their ID and I went in and did some research before I had the conversation.
Okay.
And so they are high verify, low authenticate, high complete, low improvise.
Yeah.
And so being upfront and direct and sharing what my emotions were about approaching the conversation without being in person, although it was difficult for me because I'm the exact opposite, as you can see from my ID 3637. I'm anything's possible. Let's go, rah rah ree, and don't authenticate anything. Just go. So it's very difficult for me to have that conversation and create the setting for that conversation. However, I'm better for having done that. So this is the first company I've ever worked for that had the instinctive drives. I wish I'd have had this at every company I'd worked for. It's incredible how accurate and helpful this is.
It's good. That's good. Well done. Well, it's simple. I love how sometimes the simplest of strategies, they're so simple you almost think, well, that wouldn't work. It's too simple. But just calling out the awkwardness, like you said, and just acknowledging that. And especially, it's funny that you say the person was avoid authenticate. Because I was listening to you as an avoid authenticate myself, thinking because you humanized it, it immediately made it much more comfortable to have that conversation. Yeah, so great move. And yeah, and good on you for even researching it in the first place. And instead of just going into the conversation, stepping back and thinking about it, and thinking about your ID, their ID, doing the homework on them. And it makes such a difference because the person, I'm sure they can feel when you're invested into them that way. You know, it makes a real difference. So,
Agreed.
well done.
Agreed.
The other thing is having that ID, I think, as well, Craig, because that pattern you were just saying, the fact that you actually did call it out, it would have grabbed the attention of that person because you weren't there to just talk about something fluffy. You were actually making the point that it was awkward, that you had something serious to say. So it all of a sudden for that ID, it would have become a priority. Like, okay, you've got my attention now. What are you really going to tell me? So
yeah,
that's good. That's good feedback.
And Paul, this is Patricia. I've had some folks that I've been talking to recently, and they're doing developmental conversations right now, and they all have to do them remotely. And what one of the gentlemen, Craig, to your point, what one of the gentlemen told me he has done is he's gone into the app and he's pulled up the 5 bullet points for development conversations, and he's actually pasted them on his, on his computer screen. So when he's having the conversations, it's right there in his face, so he can keep in mind what he needs to remember and how to present, the information. So I thought that was great when he told me he did that. It was like, whoop, whoop.
That's very funny because that's exactly what I did. I have these little devices on my monitor that you can hang papers off of.
Yep.
And that's exactly what I did because it's a lot of content to remember about a person.
Mm-hmm.
Much less try to remember everything about your own ID, right? Now,
and what you need to tell them.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a good point. I failed to mention that, but just the information overload. But it's excellent information, and I've learned that if I apply myself to it and be an adult with the information about myself and about the other person, we seem to be having better conversations.
Absolutely.
And I'm grateful for it, honestly.
And just those 5 bullet points on when having feedback and development conversations, those work in any conversation. They really are valuable.
Agreed.
Patricia, I'm curious with the, you said you got a client where they're doing a bunch of development conversations, which are pretty tricky conversations to have virtually. Mm-hmm. Have there been any other learnings that they've experienced from doing that are worth sharing with the group here today?
Basically, what he told me was that his learning is that it's made him much more mindful of what he needs to do in preparing. He has my ID pattern, so sometimes we don't prepare as well as we should. And it's made him much more mindful in his preparation.
Okay, to factor in the other person's ID.
Exactly.
Yeah, material. And for those on the call who don't know that already, when you, on our platform, on the app, as Patricia was calling it, you can look up someone's ID, and there are a range of different bullet points for, how that person operates at their best and how to give them feedback and so on. You just click into the relevant section and it gives you 4 or 5 bullet points that will push you in the right direction. Richard, I saw you had your hand up.
Hey, Paul, 2 points. Oh, that was great. Craig did that prep, and I think those tools in the app are fantastic as well. One suggestion thing I've used is to find someone with a similar ID to the person you're going to have the conversation with and bounce that off them. How did that land with you? And probably get some feedback on refinements. And then the other one is, and I find it particularly avoid completed people that maybe leap straight in and the conversation doesn't go well. I find even though it's by far inferior, doing the research even after the event and going back and mopping it up with the tools you should have used in the first place is still worth doing.
That's true. That's a really good point, Richard. Thank you for sharing both of those points, actually. The dress rehearsal, I mean, even I do that. If I've got something really sensitive and I know the ID pretty well, there's just nuances that only by talking to someone with the same ID do you pick up keywords, or you get guided in a way that, if something wasn't going to land, no matter how well intentioned you were. I think that is a great point. And your second point about it's not too late to mop it up afterwards, there's a care factor in doing that that really lands well for most people. So thank you. That's great guidance, Richard. Thank you. Now, the other question that I had asked a couple of times as well previously was, how do you keep people engaged through a virtual meeting? And that slide that rather than deal with that now, I'm aware of the time, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I would just, direct you to that slide and have a look at that, because in there are a bunch of tips, both to keep people engaged, and then you can also go onto the app and it will talk about, if you really want to sort of connect with people and have them be at their best, what do you take into account? And I think between those two resources, you'll get what you need to keep people engaged, as well as the protocols I mentioned right up front about how to, design the meeting so that it's, works better for the entire group. Guys, we're almost out of time. There's one final thing I want to do, and Vicky, you made a little contribution before, but I just want to call out in the rest of the team. Vicky was actually running a webinar until 2 a.m. this morning, and is up, and probably went beyond 2 a.m. but is on the call again today. So well done, Vic. That's a great work ethic on your part. I wasn't expecting to see you here, but I hope running the virtual webinar that you did went really well. Did it go well?
I think she's dropped off, Paul. Maybe she has gone. Maybe she's gone to bed now. She might have headed off. Waited for the call and gone to bed.
At least had the video on. That's a good thing. Hey guys, thank you so much for being on the call. If there are other webinars that you would like to see us, covering topics on, I love doing these with you. It's great to have this community sort of building a lot of this together and sharing their learnings. I'm very happy to do it every week. It's a way for us to stay connected through this sort of interesting time around the world as well. So I'm sure we will have one next week. I'll just look at what topics are coming up that people would like us to cover, and we'll send out a notice for you. Hopefully it works and we can see you on the call next week. Have a great day or evening. Thanks for making time today. And if there's ever anything else we can help you with, please reach out. We love this sort of area and we give you any help we can. Take care, guys. All the best.